Rise. Welcome to Psychology 101. Thomas will take us on Ricardo's time machine. Back to this time, 1978. So put on your lime green leisure suit. Lime. Okay, and also get your disco records, and let's get the class started. Tom.
Need some music.
Got your attention. Welcome to Psychology 101. I walk into Dr. Shambar's class, and the first thing he says is, take off your shoes and have a seat. The first thing I notice is, there are no desks in the room. So taking a seat is actually sitting on the floor in a big circle with all the other students. Now, what do you think Dr. Shambar was into?
Meditation.
Yoga and meditation. So, you do yoga, Reed, I believe, and Annette does yoga. I will learn more from you later about yoga. But I learned a little bit of yoga from Dr. Shambar. That's phase 1 of Psychology 101. Unfortunately, about 4 weeks into the class, dear Dr. Shambar had a massive heart attack. Died in his office on campus.
No.
Phase 1 was over. But you know what? I did learn a little bit about yoga. I put back on my shoes. So sorry. Especially to the front row here, but that was part of the deal. Phase 2 started the next week. We had a new instructor, obviously. The doc wasn't coming back, okay? And she taught us some very basic concepts about psychology. The first one that she taught us was conditioned response. Do you remember Pavlov and his dogs?
Yes.
Okay? Pavlov had the dogs, and he had the ability to see how much salivation they had given certain things happening. So he put down some food, and the dog salivated, as you would expect, because they saw and smelled the food. Over and over he did that, always got the same response. And then he rang the bell and put down the food, and the dog salivated. Over and over, food, food, and the dog salivated. And then he did something very tricky, this doctor. He rang the bell but didn't put down food. And the dogs salivated anyway. Did they have a reason to salivate? There was no food. But they were conditioned for the response to salivate because of the bell. That's what they associated with food. Now, I was taught that in phase 2. I learned that when I got married, though. I remember distinctly the first time my wife got angry with me. You could say that I rang her bell in a very negative way. So I learned to not ring her bell in that way anymore. Now I could also ring her bell in some very good ways to get a different conditioned response. That was fine. But you know what? I did not ring her bell in that negative way. And that's how I really learned about conditioned response. Another thing I was taught in phase 2 was about the hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you start with really basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter. Then you have the safety needs. Then you have the social needs, I believe, the esteem needs, and the very top is self-actualization. Okay? Self-actualization is where you really understand, pursue what you were put on God's green earth for. It's self-actualization. This is why I'm here and what I'm trying to accomplish for myself and others. Now, imagine if you were living in Syria. Do you think you'd be pursuing the apex, self-actualization?
No.
You have some lower needs that are not being met. Number 1 being safety. People are being shot over there. Not very safe. So very few people in Syria are self-actualizing. Okay? So I was taught about the hierarchy of needs in Psychology 101, Phase 2. I learned it much later. There's a difference between being taught something and learning it, if you haven't picked up on that. I learned it when I was part of the group. It was a pretty big group, and the group had as their apex a very lofty ideal. So let's say you were in Greenpeace. What would be self-actualization for that group? Save the planet. Or for a religious organization, it might be save the world. Something like that. There were two problems with me being in that group. Well, actually one problem. I didn't buy into their idea of self-actualization. It worked for the group, but it didn't work for me. Hey, let's face it. Self-actualization is self-actualization, not the group's actualization. Now, there are many people in the group that actually adopted that ideal as their own self-actualization. And that was cool for them. But what I noticed is many of those people had self-esteem issues. Whereas that in the pyramid, below self-actualization. So that group, being part of that group is how I really learned about the hierarchy of needs. You have to meet those lower needs, and your self-actualization is your self-actualization, not somebody else for you. Another thing I was taught in Psychology 101 Phase 2 was about groupthink. Now we're a group, right? Do we have groupthink? No, we don't have groupthink. Groupthink is a very bad thing. It happens a lot in government or in big organizations. It's when you have a very insulated group, not a lot of critical thinking, not a lot of thinking outside the box, a lot of conditioned response. If you say something incorrect to the leader or to the other people, you'll get a negative response. Conditioned responses that we saw in Pavlov's dogs. Now, the best example of this, the story about the emperor had no clothes. Okay, so there was an emperor, he walked into the square, and he had no clothes on, butt naked, but in his mind, he had a beautiful robe on. So all the people, because of groupthink, not our group, we're a cool group, because of groupthink, everybody said, oh my gosh, that is the most beautiful robe I've ever seen. A beautiful robe. Beautiful robe. One day, a little boy came into the square. He was an outsider. You're butt naked, he said to the emperor. The emperor was so ashamed. He immediately went and got some clothes on. So that is an example of groupthink. I was taught groupthink in Psychology 101, Phase 2. When did I learn it? When I was part of a group that had groupthink. Okay? So the real theme of the story is Psychology 101 was a trip. I mean, it was 1978, let's face it. Okay? It was a trip. And I learned a few things, like yoga. I need more help from reading the net, though, to really get me over the top of that. I was taught many things. But you know, I think most things are really learned in the school of life. Thank you.